Okay guys, you should be on page 413 and you're supposed to be doing problems 1 through 22. Okay, so for this I'm going to go over a few problems from each section just so you understand what I expect from you from those different sections. Okay, so I'm only going to do one from the first section where it says write as a fraction, then write as a decimal. The video that you watched earlier goes over a lot of how to use the graphs to show the hundredths and the tenths and hundredths place. So I'm only going to use one of those from this one. Okay, so from the graph we see that it's divided into tens, and so we know that we're going to use our tenths labels. And so all we're going to do now is we're going to do our fraction first. So now I'm going to be working with tens, or with the tenths, so I'm going to go ahead and put my 10 on the bottom to represent that. And then all I'm going to do now is just count how many shaded columns that I have, or rods. And so that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I have 9 shaded, so I'm going to put that on top. So that's how you would write the 9/10ths as a fraction. And now let's move on to our decimal. Okay, so we know we don't have a whole number, so that's going to be 0 and a decimal. And so since we're using the tenths spot, we know the 9 is going to go in the tenth spot where this is. So we know that this place right behind the decimal is tenths, and then the place right after that is hundredths. So we're working with the tenths, so we would put the 9 in the tenth spot. Okay, so that's how you're going to do number 1. Okay, let's look at the next section, 4 through 9. So we're going to go over 4 and 5, and your directions are rename as a fraction in simplest form. So this is basically how you're going to convert your decimals into the fractions. Yeah, and so we know we're working with just tenths and hundredths, and so we have 0 and 5/10ths, so we're going to write that as a fraction. And so we know we're working with tenths because the 5's in our tenth spot. Do the tenth on the bottom, and I have 5 in that spot, so we know 5's going to go on top. And then it says to simplify, so we need to make sure we do that step. And so we know these two numbers can be divided by 5, and so 5 divided by 5 is 1, 5 divided by 10 is 2. So 1/2. So that would be your answer for number 4. Okay, let's look at number 5. Now number 5 is different because we have 0 and 25 hundredths, because we see that it moves on. This 5 is in our hundredths spot, and so we're going to go ahead and write the hundredths at the bottom, and then we have 25 hundredths, so that's going to go on top. And then don't forget you have to simplify. So 25 can actually go into 100, so we're going to divide all of that by 25. 25 divided by 25 is 1, and then 25 divided by 100 is 4. So your answer should be 1/4. Okay, let's look at, where are we, number 10. Okay, so your first part of directions say use grid paper to model each. I don't want you to do that. I just want you to focus on the next set of directions, which says then write each as a decimal or a fraction. So that's the only directions I want you to do for 10 through 14. So we're going to go over 10 and 11. Okay, so we have to write each as a fraction or a decimal. So since we have a decimal already, so that tells me that 10 we're going to write as a fraction. And we know the 1 is in our tenths spot. So the 10 is going to go on the bottom, and then the 1 is in that spot, so that's going to go on top. So that's your answer for number 10. 37, we know we're working with a fraction, and we have 37 hundredths. So the 37 is going to be in the hundredths spot. We don't have a whole number, so that's going to be 0. Do our decimal, and then 37 goes in that hundredths spot. Okay, so that's how you do number 11. Number 15. 15 through 18, your directions are these decimals equivalent? Right, yes or no? So if they're equivalent, that means are they basically the same? So we're going to do 15 and 17. Let's look at 15. So the numbers that they give you are 0 and 6/10, and then 0 and 6 hundredths. So these would actually be equivalent, so you would write yes, because even if I didn't have the 0, it would be the same. And sometimes you don't always need a 0 when working with decimals. So anytime you see point or 0 decimal, a number, and then 0 decimal, a number, and then 0, they're always going to be equivalent. They're always going to be the same, because if you didn't have that 0 right there, it'd still be the same. Alright, so 15 is yes, they are equivalent. 17 is a little bit different. We notice that the 7 is in the 10th spot, and this 7, so this is in the 10th spot, this 7 is in the 100th spot. So when we see a decimal that has 0 decimal 0 then a number, we know that it's going to be different from just 0 decimal and a number, because it's not the same value. Because this is in this the 10th spot, and the 7 is in the 100th spot. So no, that would not be equivalent. Okay, I hope that makes sense for y'all. Okay, let's look at your last section. I'm going to need to erase just so we have room. Okay. Alright. So we're working with a number line. Let's do 19. Alright, we have this number line. Alright. 0, 0.5, and then whole number 1. Okay. So it says, to what decimal and fraction is each arrow pointing? Okay, so first we need to find the decimal first, because that's what they give us on our number line. And what I would suggest doing first is, you see how this number line goes from 0 to 0.5, which is the halfway point, all the way to a whole number 1. And so what you're going to do is go ahead and fill in these blank little marks. Okay, so this would be 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, we have 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, and 0.9 until we get to our whole number. So it's just basically like 0 through 10. Okay, so we have our arrow, and it is on this little mark. And so since we've already filled it in, we already know that it's on 0.4, 4 tenths. Okay, so that's our decimal. We have 4 tenths, because that's where it stopped right here. Now all we have to do is just write that as a fraction. And so we know 4 is in our 10th spot, so 10 is going to go on the bottom of our fraction, and then we have 4, so that's going to go on top. So that's how you would do 19, okay? Right, let's look at number 20. Same thing. Okay. 0.5. Whole number. We're going to do the same thing. Okay. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to fill in our number line, just like we did for 19. So 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.6, or 0.5, 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9, all the way up to our whole number 1. Okay, so now our arrow is pointing on this mark. And so since I have my number line filled in, we already know that it's on 6 tenths. So that is the decimal we're working with. And so now all we have to do is just write that as a fraction. So we know the 6 is in the 10th spot. So do our 10 on the bottom. It's 6 right here. So we're going to do 6 on top. So that is how you should write it, as a decimal and a fraction. And then for 21 and 22, you're going to do the same thing. Write your number line out and then fill in your number line with the blank numbers. It's always going to be like 0 through 10, or 21 is 10 through 20. So just make sure to fill those in first. And then you're just going to do the same steps, and make sure you pay attention to your tenths and your hundredths spot on the numbers that they give you, okay? If you have any questions, just let me know.